I know what you're thinking. Synth, where's the Crimson Desert review? Well, I'm about 40 hours into the game, and I still have 4 more story chapters to go. And since it's been quite a while since I've released something at this point, I thought what better time than to create another Gaming is Dying style video. Despite the internet generally souring on this game, the more I played it, the more I realized the hidden potential here. This could have very easily been a cult classic, and on a certain Mongolian basket weaving forum, it's certainly being pushed as one. It is being hyped up by many as the Korean spiritual successor to Dragon's Dogma, and in some ways, that's exactly what it is. In the sense that Koreans still do not understand that fundamentally, video games need one thing at their core: a solid gameplay loop. Though admittedly, this is also something the AAA industry has not understood for what feels like well over a decade at this point. It feels like every single modern AAA game has 1,000 slop mechanics. Why? Because some executives said they had to be in the game. I'm sure that the incompetent diversity hire developers are responsible for some of these issues, but in the case of Crimson Desert specifically, we had a former developer explain exactly what went wrong with the game. That bureaucracy took over the company, that there were more managers, more executives than there were actual developers working on the game. And of course, these people knew nothing about video games. They just saw mechanics from Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Red Dead Redemption 2, and said, oh, that has to be an hour game, with no regard to how this could potentially water down the admittedly quite fun core combat experience. Crimson Desert tries to be an everything game, and a game for everyone is a game for no one. Now, if you're expecting my full review of the game to be incredibly negative, as many of my AAA game reviews are, you would actually be wrong.
Oh, you're about to see what I'm doing, Mitch. Oh, get back in the fucking kitchen, whore. Good. This is a Viking, hello. What do you think movie's gonna accomplish, whore? Oh, yeah, you like that? Oh, you like that? Oh, how about again? Oh, what about another one? Oh. Boom! Get some! Yeah, fuck you! Who the fuck you think you are? Get these furries out of my game!
I'm sure you've heard the claim online that the game gets good around 8 hours, which is honestly kind of a lie, but it does get steadily better the longer you play it. I don't know why, but they front-loaded a lot of the worst missions in the game right in the beginning, and it takes quite a while to get used to the very foreign control scheme. It's unlike anything you've probably played in any other action game, and in general, the game just has a very sluggish, sort of realistic movement, like a lot of RE engine games, which I don't think fits for a game like this, where you basically have superpowers. It should be very fluid and responsive, again, like Dragon's Dogma 1. So today, I just want to talk a little bit about simple gameplay loops. Again, it feels like a lost art in modern gaming. I'm sure everyone here has heard the famous Bungie quote about the 30-second loop, but I'll play it again just in case.
In Halo 1, there was maybe 30 seconds of fun that happened over and over and over and over again. So if you can get 30 seconds of fun, you can pretty much stretch that out to be an entire game. And so you can have all the great graphics and all the different characters and lots of different weapons with amazing effects, but if you don't nail that 30 seconds, you're not going to have a great game.
And this is something I think most game developers, at least starting with the mid-80s, understood. It was only forgotten in the past decade or so. Maybe it's just because I've reached Unk status, but I've grown more and more appreciation for games that understand just one basic gameplay system should be refined to perfection, or at least as close as possible. I've received many critiques for my taste in video games over the years, some just in good fun, some being legitimate insults as if it's an attack on my credibility that I like games made for all ages. Listen, man, I like what I like. No words you can say in the English language could possibly convince me not to like Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter. These are my favorite games. And what is something in common with all these games? Again, a simple gameplay loop, refining it to near perfection. Spyro the Dragon is still my favorite game to this day, and all you do in that game is explore mini sandbox levels, collect gems, free crystallized dragons. Your character abilities are so simplistic. You can walk, you can jump, you can glide, you can charge, and you can breathe fire, and that's pretty much all you do for about 90% of the game. There's only a couple gimmick power-ups. And yet the game never gets boring for me. Why is that? Well, obviously one answer is nostalgia, and that's true. I won't deny that for a second. But I think a bigger component is that the developers at Insomniac at the time understood that they had to make as much as possible out of so simple systems, through the level design offering different platforming challenges or different types of exploration. I feel like every single level in the game stands out in my memory incredibly well. Another great example I'm sure many will name is Super Mario 64. Again, very simplistic systems, but people still speedrun the game to this day, and it's not just because of nostalgia, it's because the very simple gameplay mechanics actually have a very high skill ceiling. Some of this is due to bugs, like backwards long jumping, but there is a certain level of mastery to such simplistic controls. And the reason I'm yapping about this is because I think of a game that just released at the time of recording this, Serene Estate's Last Guy, an indie game published by Cult Games. Now, you might recognize that name because they were the developers of The Great Rebellion, an indie roguelite 2D action platformer where you play as a Ryan Gosling saving the world from Globo Homo. And the reason I bring this game up is because obviously these guys want to be right-wing creators in the gaming space, which is very rare. And so you would think a channel like mine would be heavily incentivized to encourage people to purchase Serene Estates. But the truth is, the game just kind of feels unfinished. And not in the sense that it's really buggy or the levels look or feel unfinished, it's just overly simplistic, like the core gameplay systems were half-baked. I only played about 90 minutes of the game, but trust me when I say it was more than enough to see that there's just not much to this game. The only mechanics I had access to were walking, jumping, pressing square to interact, and then pressing circle to drop an object. Now, potentially, you could actually do quite a lot with gameplay systems that simple, especially because this is not an entirely accurate comparison to compare it to Spyro and Mario 64 because this game is a puzzle platformer. But therein lies the rest of my issues with the game. The puzzles are brain dead. They're not even really puzzles. They're like, okay, I need a power core, so I'm gonna platform across a couple things, grab a power core, then platform back. That's not a puzzle. And the worst part is, it sort of breaks one of the fundamental rules of platformers. It has auto vaulting. What this does is obviously remove most challenges from the platforming, because you can be way off and your character will just glue to the ledge and pull themselves up. There's also a health system in this game. You can even get health expansions. Yet in 90 minutes, there was only one enemy in the game that just did damage. Every other time I died was dying instantly from fall damage from full health. So I don't even know why the hell health is in the game at all. I mean, if you compare it to Crash Bandicoot 1, for example, very simple game, and yet still beloved by many. In that game, you also could only jump and attack. That was pretty much it. And yet Naughty Dog designed very challenging levels that felt incredibly satisfying to beat with such simple gameplay systems. This game is nothing like that. I think the main reason most people even want to play these games outside of, I guess, trying to relive childhood nostalgia is because they are simple but very fun games. This is almost like the opposite end of the spectrum compared to Crimson Desert, which we'll get back to in a second, but in Crimson Desert's case, it has a million superfluous mechanics, whereas Serene Estates has almost nothing to it, which is fine. Again, if you look at NES games, Super Nintendo games, they often have very simple systems. So where does this simple, satisfying gameplay loop come from? Well, it's simple. It's usually from the level design. Again, I think Crash Bandicoot 1, perfect example of this. The game is so simple, but almost every level is memorable because of the sheer challenge involved in beating a lot of them. They're going to stick into your memory for the rest of your life because you probably died 50 fucking times to the second bridge level. How could you forget? I also think enemy placement is becoming a lost art. I've actually played quite a few indie 3D platformers that have barely, if any, actual enemies in them. Serene Estates doesn't really have any of this. It has almost no enemies. It does have a few stage hazards like electrified water. It has very unforgiving fall damage, but that's pretty much it. There was a part where I had to unfreeze an area, and that could have been an opportunity to maybe have some kind of cold damage. Maybe you have a time limit in that zone. Literally anything to break up the monotony of just walking around and picking up batteries. Nope. It feels like I'm just wandering around these dystopian corporate sci-fi environments just to look at them, I suppose. The only selling point of this game is that it is thinly veiled political commentary on the metaverse and increasingly losing ourselves in escapist fantasies and how dystopian the real world has become over time, that kind of stuff. There's a million left-wing propaganda games we certainly could use with a few right-wing ones. But again, like I just said, when it comes to 3D platformers, people play these games for the gameplay. I think at the concept phase, they needed a far more solid gameplay loop. I never had to use my brain to solve any puzzle. I never had to use any skill to jump across a gap because of the vaulting system. This game is half-baked. It's that simple. I've been called many things over the years: grifter, chud, some form of neo-Nazi perhaps. But the whole point of this channel has always been I want AAA games to be better. And I want indie games to be better too. I don't often shill indie games on this channel because I don't lower my standards for indie games anymore. However, for all 5 of you who like baby games like me, if you did want a recent indie game suggestion in the same genre, Demon Tides, the sequel to Demon Turf, came out like a month ago now, and it's pretty solid, but I'm not going to review it in this video. I did want to talk about Serene Estates though, and I just know for a fucking fact that if I made that video, nobody would watch it. But to get back to the point of this video, let's circle back around to Crimson Desert, since I just know that my review is probably not going to be out for likely another 2 weeks. There's been many critiques leveled at this game. Like I said, it's an everything game. If you've seen a mechanic in a AAA game in the past 5 years, it's likely in Crimson Desert. It's got everything. It's got slow horse rides. It's got cleaning chimneys and other such chores. It's got mining and woodcutting like fucking RuneScape. It's got tailing missions. It's got stealth missions. It's got interrogation mechanics. It's got disguises. It's got farming. It's got banking investments. The list goes on. I feel like almost every time I did a single player mission, there was a new gimmick mechanic for it. And one of the most obvious slapped on systems is the floating island puzzles just ripped straight out of Tears of the Kingdom. Except these are puzzles designed by aliens because there's no signposting whatsoever, and half the puzzles require you to engage with a mechanic that has never come up before, had no tutorial in gameplay. You just kinda have to figure it out with no hints. This is one of the most baffling games I've ever played. Now, some of this might make sense to the people who have played Black Desert Online, as those people have claimed this is basically just the single-player version of that game, except single-player in the worst way possible. I've heard single-player MMO leveled at certain games as either an insult or a compliment, depending on who you are. Some examples being Dragon's Dogma, Kingdoms of Amalur, games that I actually enjoyed. Even a really, sloppy Slav type game like Elix 2 I had fun with. So maybe I'm just more predisposed to liking this genre, but man, Crimson Desert is a hard sell. The question on your mind might be, why the hell would I even bother playing this? Why is the review not out yet? Well, it's because at its core, the gameplay is fun. It is still jank, and the controls are fucking weird as hell, man. Name another game where the double jump is square and then R3. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm not going to describe the systems here. I probably will in the review. All you need to know is actually killing enemies is fun. In a weird way, it's halfway split between Dynasty Warriors and a Souls-like game. When you're fighting normal-ass bandits and knights and all that, you can just take out legions of them with your over-the-top flashy abilities. Your character has super strength. You can slam people with trees. You can clothesline them. You can elbow drop them. You can RKO them. You can push people off of cliffs. You can set them on fire. It's a great spectacle, not too much depth to it, a lot of complexity. You probably have like twice as many moves, probably 3 times as many moves as a game like Dragon's Dogma. But the actual combat complexity is pretty low, and a lot of stuff is style over substance, very Korean in that sense. But it is undeniably fun. But on the other hand, you have the Souls-like aspect, the boss fights. These are all jank as hell, and they all kind of have a gimmick to them, similar to Demon Souls, which I do like, but the game doesn't really hint at any of these gimmicks. So unless you're using the internet while playing this, you're probably not going to figure out half of the boss's weaknesses. Because the bosses are Souls-like bosses with these huge combos, attacks that can kill you in 2 hits, you don't get to use any of your flashy moves. Most of the time I was fighting these guys, I was just using the spear's parry, which is the most broken move in the game, or sometimes I was using the R1, R2 strong attack, because that has a bunch of invincibility frames. But ultimately, every boss just came down to parrying the attacks you could, dodging the attacks you can't, building up their stagger meter, and then beating the shit out of them. I have 50 moves to choose from, but only 5 or 6 are viable for most boss fights. And again, the reason I bring all of this up is to compare it to Dragon's Dogma. In Dragon's Dogma, you have far fewer overall combat attacks. You only get to choose 6 special abilities, unless you're a warrior, in which case you only get 3. Whereas in Crimson Desert, you have access to all your skills at all times. You can hot swap any weapons. There's no classes. So you have access to probably like 50 different moves, even if a lot of them share similar functions. However, I'm going to argue Dragon's Dogma has far better core combat for a multitude of reasons. One, the controls are incredibly silky, smooth, and responsive, and you can cancel out of almost everything. This feels so good. Of course, Dragon's Dogma 2 fucked that up, but I'm not going to talk about that in this video. And choosing a small selection of moves to fight with actually adds more gameplay variety, because you can prepare for certain encounters against certain bosses, and it gives you a reason to unlock new moves to see what they can do, right? In Crimson Desert, all of the melee grapple moves basically do the same thing. You're either slamming a dude who's blocking onto the ground, or you're throwing a dude, and that's pretty much everything except split across like 7 or 8 different moves, it feels like. In Dragon's Dogma, you can get a move that grapples, you can get a move that knocks an enemy into the air, you can get a move that does super high damage, a move that is a bunch of rapid strikes. In the case of the Sorcerer, all of your incredibly powerful spells do something over the top and incredibly satisfying, and there's no equivalent in Crimson Desert. There's just so much more gameplay variety. Another obvious way Dragon's Dogma has better combat is that its core systems actually are built around the giant monsters. I've described the combat in the past as a combination of Monster Hunter and Shadow of the Colossus. All of the major fights in the game are against giant monsters that you can climb all over and stab them in their weak spots. And about half of the playable classes have mechanics that perfectly complement these systems, with Strider especially being able to climb faster and dealing bonus damage and having a special attack that has a unique function while climbing monsters. The other half of the classes are kind of a mixed bag when it comes to dealing with giant monsters, often just dealing with them by doing an absurd amount of stagger or just raw damage numbers. But you can tell, given the game's limited budget and resources, that the developers ensured that fighting a Cyclops or a Chimera or a Drake for the millionth time would be fun, because every class has a fun interaction with these bosses. In Crimson Desert, you have multiple different characters to play as, though the game fucked that up too. I'll talk about that in the review, but for large portions of the story, you can only play as Cliff. And Cliff is the only one who has access to all of the Abyss-related abilities, like the Sticky Arm, as I call it anyway, so you're more incentivized to play as him over the other characters. Now, of course, broadly, Crimson Desert has far more of a different kind of gameplay variety, the worst kind. I promise this video is still about gameplay loops, and not just me rambling about nothing. What even is the gameplay loop in Crimson Desert? I guess it depends on what you're actually doing. If you're exploring the insanely huge open world, I guess it's doing side quests, exploring ancient ruins for treasure, defeating all the enemies in the Far Cry-style outposts to liberate the region. But if you're doing the main quest, you could be doing fucking anything. I mean, genuinely, it is just a clusterfuck of slop mechanics over and over again. There's no consistency, and there's definitely no depth to any of the activities you're doing. Dragon's Dogma, the gameplay loop is simple. You go on quests, you climb giant monsters, and you stab them in the face. In the case of Bitter Black Isle, you explore a series of rooms, open treasure chests, kill more giant bosses by stabbing them in the face, and then appraise the magical items that you retrieve from said chests, and then equip your new overpowered armor and weapons. And then basically just do the dungeon again until you get all the loot. And I basically only tackled a small part of Crimson Desert's overall gameplay loop. I didn't even get into any of the RuneScape-like elements. I've actually recently gotten back into RuneScape. It has wormed its way in my brain, and maybe just because, again, I've reached Unk status, or it's my inner Z-Lennial returning to form and having a blast. But I'm beginning to realize just how well-designed RuneScape is, for how incredibly simplistic it is. At its core, it is a game where you click on rocks and a number goes up, and yet it is probably the greatest cookie clicker style game of all time. It is actually incredibly impressive how satisfying it is, at least for neurodivergent individuals like myself. It is extremely addicting. And the reason I bring up RuneScape is because I've actually heard people compare Crimson Desert to RuneScape. Hell, I even did it earlier in this video. Because yes, you can mine rocks for materials to upgrade your weapons. You can cut down trees for the same purpose. You can even farm in this game. However, there is one massive, extremely huge difference between Crimson Desert and RuneScape. In RuneScape, when you mine, your mining level goes up. And when your level goes up, you can mine better rocks, which you can then smelt into better bars that you can use to smith better equipment. Now, of course, those of you who actually play RuneScape are going to say, nobody actually uses smithing to make their own weapons and armor. And you would be right. Even as an Iron Man, which is basically a game mode where you're not allowed to trade with other players, including the Grand Exchange, you're only going to use smithing very early on to make your equipment, but I'm not going to go into a tirade about that. The point is, all of RuneScape's number goes up systems are interlinked. As I just said, you use mining to get ore, which you can use with smithing to make equipment or ammo. You could mine gem rocks, which you can use crafting to make jewelry, which you can then enchant with magic to have magic amulets, which improve your stats or allow you to teleport around, or various other functions. Wood cutting ties into fire making. Wood cutting also ties into fletching. Farming ties into herb lore, and also wood cutting for that matter. I could go on. All of these incredibly simplistic systems are tied into each other, and there's several different ways to train these skills. With Crimson Desert, there is no depth to the mining. You hit the rock with the pickaxe, and you get the ore. And then you use the ore at a smith to upgrade the weapon. That's it. There's nothing else to it. Which, don't get me wrong, upgrading your own weapons and armor is inherently satisfying. But if gaining the materials is a chore in and of itself, or you could just buy the materials with money, then mining and woodcutting feel like a complete waste of time. Now again, those of you who don't play RuneScape would say, well, Synth, all of RuneScape is a waste of time. Sure, you're right. But watching a number go up is inherently satisfying. It makes the chore not feel like a chore. It feels like a skill I'm getting better at. I'm not getting better at woodcutting or fishing or farming or any of those things in Crimson Desert. I'm just doing a chore to get the material, which is slowing the game down from the real fun gameplay, which is the combat, which is going to be the ultimate purpose of my review when it eventually comes out, that buried very, very deep inside a million layers of slop, Crimson Desert is a fun game. There is a potentially good gameplay loop in there, but because it's basically just a single player version of an MMO, you have to do a bunch of dog shit MMO chores for no conceivable reason, and also a million movie game cutscenes and a nonsensical story on top of all of that, just to get to the sometimes fun gameplay. Which I guess I just spoiled the entire conclusion of my next video. But you're gonna watch it anyway, because I'm gonna send the Synthetic Death Squad to your door if you don't. So to wrap back around to this rambly-ass video, the point is modern games do not understand the appeal of the simple gameplay loop. 20 years ago, devs understood a video game has to be fun first, before it is anything else, before it's propaganda, before it's some flavorless slop to feed to the goddamn consumer pigs. It had to be a fun game at its core. I don't know how modern devs have forgotten this. Maybe they're not allowed to make good games. Maybe they're just incompetent diversity-hire fucks who couldn't make a good game to save their lives. But games are never just simple anymore. because I guess simplicity does not appeal to the masses, and that's all they care about. And sometimes, in the case of indie games, it's not an issue of complexity, it's an issue of depth. The game is incredibly simple, but it lacks any creativity or innovation. So the game just ends up being repetitive and a lesser version of a game from 20 years ago. So why would I play your game when I can just go boot up a game from my childhood that is better? Now that I'm 30 years old, I have more of an appreciation than ever for simple gameplay loops. All my favorite games are simple by nature. Again, we unironically need a return to form. That form being fun. I know fun is a meaningless buzzword, of course, and incredibly subjective, but there is definitely an objective way to design video games. And somewhere along the way, those methods were lost because I don't think developers are making games for gamers anymore, as I've said for probably 6 years now. They're made for the lowest common denominator, and in the case of indie devs, they make the games for themselves, which I don't think is always inherently bad. But if you're an ideologue, doesn't matter if it's left or right, and you would rather make a propaganda piece than a fun game, then you're probably going to make a shit game. So I hope you enjoyed this little excuse to ramble about Crimson Desert and Serene Estates, because I didn't think I was going to get another opportunity anytime soon. If you'd like me to make more of these Gaming is Dying style rants, rambles, unscripted video essays, if you want to call them that, let me know in the comments. Especially because I'm a lazy ass, and these are a little bit easier to make, and probably more fun than normal reviews as well, if I'm being honest. That's about it. See you next time, guys.